Welcome to John Gets Games. Today I'll be doing an unpaid Kickstarter preview for Hocus. In this game, players will be taking on different schools of magic with asymmetric spells. They will be casting them in an attempt to create the best poker hands possible. It might seem at first like this is just a magical poker variant, but I can assure you that is far from the case. First I'll go over the rules, and then I'll jump into my initial impressions. Here are all the cards that come in a game of Hocus. Now, I'd like to mention that this is a print-on-demand prototype copy of the game that was sent to me by the designer. The only thing that's not present here that will be in the full game is a way to track points that you're going to get from round to round. So over here we see that there are 4 different suits of cards in the game, and they range from 0 to 14 in value. They are all identical suits. The numbers on top, the only thing different is the colors. However, this owl suit down here, every card on the bottom has some special text, but I'll get to what that means in a minute. And over here are all the spell cards that come in the game. There are 8 different types of specialty spells that come, as well as 5 cards here, which serve as a player reference with the basic spells that each player is going to have. At the beginning of each game, each player is going to take the 3 cards that are associated with a specific class of magic, and that's going to be one that they use for the entire game. It's good to note, however, that the enchantment and chronomancy magic schools are pretty advanced. You don't want to touch those until you play the game several times and really understand how it plays. Hocus plays 2 to 5 players, and the only difference in setup between all those player counts are the number of cards that come for each suit into the deck. In a 5-player game, you use every card in the deck. In a 3 and 4-player game, you're going to remove the 14 value and the 0 value from all 4 decks. And in the 2-player game, you're going to remove the 14 and 13 as well as the 1 and 0 from all of the decks. Then you'll shuffle it all up and you'll be ready to play. Once each player has chosen their specific school of magic, so here we have alchemy versus flame, then each player is going to get dealt a hand of cards. In the 2 and 3-player game, that is a 10-card hand. In the 4 and 5-player game, you get dealt a 9-card hand. On each turn, a player must cast a single spell. Now, each player has 6 spells available to them. They have 3 on their basic spell deck, which everybody has, and then they have the 3 that are specifically custom to their school of magic. If you happen to have face-up owl cards in front of you, you are also allowed to discard one of these to evaluate the special action on the bottom. I'll get around to explaining how you're going to get these face-up owl cards in front of you in a little bit. The first basic spell you can cast is Build Community. You see it says place 1 card from your hand face up into a community, and there's a limit of 4 cards per community. Communities are face-up rows of cards that are in the center of the table that each player is going to have access to use when we evaluate scoring at the end of each turn. In the 2 through 4-player game, there will be 2 separate communities, and in the 5-player game, there will be 3 rows of communities. At the beginning of every turn, there will be no cards in these communities, so the first person to build to a community will establish its location on the board. The second basic spell that we can cast is Build Pocket. We see it says place 1 or 2 cards from your hand face down into 1 pocket. You are never allowed to have more than 2 pockets with 2 cards in each. So pockets are the cards that you will get to play at the end of each round when we score that only you will get to use. So unlike the community, which every single person can play off of, nobody but yourself gets these pockets. So I could take these 2 cards, for instance, place them face down in front of my player area, and now this is one of my 2 maximum pockets. And as I said before, you're never allowed to have more than 2 cards in each pocket. The last of the basic spells that you can cast is Build Pot. It says place 1 card from your hand face down next to a community. There's no limit to the number of cards in this pot. I've fast forwarded the game a little bit to illustrate this point, so now we see we have 1 community with 3 cards in it here and a community with 2. They max out with 4. So somebody played the Build Pot action. We have 1 pot per community. So you would take the card that you are playing into a pot and you put it sideways next to the specific community. And now this card is going to have the victory points that are going to be given to the player who wins the specific community, which I'll explain in just a second. The beginning of the end of a round begins once a player places the 4th card into the last community. So once every community has 4 cards. At this point, every player gets to take 1 more spell action, including the player who played the final card into a community. At this point, the round is over, and now we get to resolve showdowns. The player who had been the start player for the overall round gets to decide which of the communities gets resolved first. So for instance, if the right-hand player had been the starting player, they might choose the top community to go first. Now the starting player needs to choose which of their 2 pockets they're going to put forward towards the showdown. For instance, they would probably choose this pocket here. Now we go to the next player, and they're going to choose between their 2 pockets here, and they would choose this pocket right here to resolve the showdown. Each player will simultaneously reveal the cards that they have in their pocket, and then we figure out who wins the showdown. What players are looking for is the strongest 5-card hand that they have based on the cards they have in their own pocket and the community cards that are face out in front. If we look at this little cheat sheet here, we can see all of the different hand types and their relative order. So the weakest is just a high card, the person with the highest card, and the very best is the straight flush. If you are familiar with Texas Hold'em poker, this is going to look very familiar to you. In this instance, the left-hand player simply has a pair. They have 2 11s. But the right-hand player has a straight. They have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So when we look at the cheat sheet here, we can see that the straight is far above the single pair, so the right-hand player wins the showdown. The reward for winning a showdown is all of the cards that were in the pot that were associated with that specific community. So we look here, and now we see this little number in the little cross star thing. This is the victory points that you're going to get if these cards are in the pool. So I never specifically mentioned it before, but the values up at the top are used for the hands, and these numbers down at the bottom are just what you get when they're in the pool. So for instance, this would be 4 + 2 + 2, or 8 points for the right-hand player. It's also very important to note that there are 2 owl cards in the pot. This is the only way that you can capture owl cards for using their specific text in future rounds. So any owl cards in a pot will score you their victory points, but then you'll put them face up in your player area, and on future turns you can expend them once to evaluate their text at the bottom in addition to the 1 spell that you cast on a turn. At this point, we will move on to the next community to be resolved. In the 2 to 4 player game, that will simply be the 1 remaining community. In a 5 player game, the starting player will once again choose between the 2 remaining communities. At this point, all players will once again simultaneously reveal their pockets that they chose for this community. Here we see that the left-hand player has a full house. They have 3 4s and then 2 2s here, so the 4 is high. The right-hand player here also has a full house, however theirs is 3 2s and 2 10s. Now it's the strength of the triple card in the full house that wins the tie, so 3 4s beats 3 2s and the left-hand player wins. They get to grab all the points that are in this pot, and we see that this is actually 7 points even though it's only 2 cards. So after 1 full round, our right-hand player got 8 points, our left-hand player got 7 points. The right-hand player does have these 2 owl cards which they can use in the next round, which might give them a slight advantage, but we once again proceed to dealing out cards. The game is going to be over at the end of any round where one player has 25 or more points, and at that point the player with the most points is the winner. I didn't talk about any of these special custom spells that are associated with each school of magic, and now I think I'm going to highlight these 6 spells here to give you an idea of the flavor and different kind of combos that you can do with these specific types of magic. Remember, this is just 2 out of the 8 different schools of magic that you get in the game. The first of these to look at is Phoenix with the Flame School of Magic. It says that for your whole action on your turn, you can discard 1 or 2 cards, then draw an equal number of cards from the deck. So this is a nice way to essentially get rid of cards that are really not working for you, cycle through to try and get better cards or just different cards that might work better for your current hand situation. The next spell I'd like to look at is Inferno. We see here it says place 2 cards into any of your pockets and then name another player who must add 1 card to the pot if able. So normally when you are building a pocket, you can put 1 to 2 cards into a single pocket. However, this allows you to put 1 card in one pocket and 1 card into another pocket if you like. Or you could just put 2 cards into a pocket, which makes it very similar to build pocket. However, you force another player to ditch a card from their hand that they have to put into one of the communities. Now at this point, that player might not know which community they're going to be strong in, so they're not sure which to put in, as well as you're potentially diluting their hand. If they only have 3 or 4 cards left in their hand and you do this to them, that might really mess up their strategy that they were going for to try and build their pockets and build up good pots. The last of the Flame School Magic spells is Flash Fire. It says move a pocket with cards into a pot. Then you can use a basic spell. So this is pretty cool. It synergizes with Inferno. You can use Inferno to build a quick pocket of cards, forcing a player to get rid of a card, and then on the next turn you could do a Flash Fire, taking all those cards you just put into your pocket and put it into a new pot, which once again allows you to do an Inferno on a future turn. Normally you only get 2 pockets, and most players just build their 2 pockets and they can't do anything more. But the Flame player can build many pockets as they cycle them out, put them into the pot. This is also a quick way to get cards into the pot. If you think you're strong in any specific community, well, you're forcing your opponents to add cards into pots, and then you are dumping lots of cards into pots, unlike usually putting only a single card in. So it's obvious that the Flame School of Magic is all about controlling the pots and getting really big pots to try and explode with all those points, and then messing with other players' hands a little bit. And now let's look at the Alchemy School of Magic. The first of their spells is Aqua Regia. It lets you examine 2 cards in a pot, and then you can take one of those and put it into a community or into one of your own pockets. This is really powerful. It lets you take a look at those pot cards, and if you see really high victory point cards in there that you did not add, then you know somebody thinks they have a very strong ability to take that specific community. And you can mess with them by taking that high victory point card out and either putting it into another community, which might work well for you, or just put it into one of your pockets. So you really dilute and reduce the victory points that one of those players has. Vice versa, you might see there's really low victory points in there and you realize they're kind of bluffing to show that they're going really big on a specific community, when in actuality their plans might be different. Next up, we have Prima Materia. Now this one's just really efficient. You get to play 2 cards into a pot and then 1 card into one of your pockets. It's essentially a very efficient version of multiple of your basic spells, because normally you can only put 1 card into a pot and 1 to 2 cards into a pocket, but now you can drop 3 cards down for only 1 action. And finally, we have Transmute. This says you can draw 2 cards from the deck, you add one of them into your hand, and you put the other one into a community or a pocket. This is really powerful. It lets you get more card options to see how you're going to evaluate your hand, and then in addition to that, it might work well for one of your pockets or for the community. You have different really strong abilities that you can use to make this work. It's really important to note that you're never allowed to cast any specific spell unless you're able to evaluate every single step of that card. For instance, I would not be able to play Transmute if the communities were full and both of my pockets were full. I would not be able to draw those 2 cards because I would not be able to evaluate the entire card. And these are just a taste of the 24 overall unique magic spells that are available that come in the game. And now I'm going to discuss my initial impressions of Hocus. Now this is not going to be a review, there's going to be no in-depth pro-con analysis here, just the things that popped up that really kind of seemed of note that I'd like to tell you guys about. So the first thing that hit me, as well as I imagine most people when they learn how to play the game, is the question of, is this game just a poker variant? And I would answer that with no, and there's a couple reasons for that. The main thing about Texas Hold'em really is about playing the people around the table. It's about bluffing and betting, and for the most part that does not exist in Hocus. Sure, you have the exact same poker hands, sure you have pockets that nobody else can see, sure you have this community that everybody gets to play in, but that's really where the similarity ends. The gameplay of Hocus is really about maximizing the spells that you have in front of you that nobody else does. You have these asymmetric spells that only you have access to, and they might synergize in very interesting ways versus other players. There's all sorts of stuff. There's one of the different schools of magic lets you have as many pockets as you want. Another one lets you kind of explode pockets. I think I showed that in the rules. There's one that lets you put cards face down into the communities. So there's all sorts of very different game-changing-esque abilities that make each play of this game play differently based on which magic sets are present. It's very much about trying to logic out and build the best poker hand that you can get, but you're building those communities. You're playing cards into it, other players are playing cards into it, whereas Texas Hold'em, that comes out randomly and you're just playing the odds. So it mechanically plays very, very differently, even though there are some vague similarities. And the next thing of note, which I just alluded to a little bit, are how cool it is that this game comes with 24 different spells to choose from. Now you pick them in 3 spell blocks, so there are 8 different schools of magic, and that's pretty cool. That means you could play this game 8 times with 8 different spell books, and I think it's going to play significantly different from one book to the next. They really do change things in rather significant ways. It's just cool that there's that amount of replayability in there, and I think certain spell books are going to play better against others in different settings. So you might play a game where you think, wow, alchemy seems really powerful, but the next time you see alchemy out, it might have a lot of trouble going against a different spellbook option. And I think the game is definitely about seeing what your power options are and what your opponent's power options are and trying to play around that. And finally, I really like the artistic style of the game. It definitely evokes magic in pretty much every way. The art is gorgeous, and I know there are only 4 different suits, so there are effectively 4 different pieces of art in this main deck of cards, but that doesn't take away from the fact that those 4 pieces of art are really pretty. So as I'm sitting here with this hand of cards, I really like what I see here, and that beautiful artwork definitely adds into the pleasure of playing the game. So in closing, if you like asymmetric games with lots of different powers and different gameplay every time you visit it, as well as kind of a pokery kind of thing going on without all of the bluffing and betting, as well as gorgeous artwork and just a neat, definitely different experience, I would consider checking out the Kickstarter. And if you'd like to see more previews of games like this, as well as in-depth reviews, full game playthroughs, and vlogs, please consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching.